The snow fell in thick sheets across the valley, burying the field hospital under layers of white. No roads led here anymore. Only helicopter pilots who knew the mountains could find the converted warehouse, its corrugated roof sagging under ice. Inside, propane heaters wheezed against the cold. The walls were plywood and canvas. Surgical lights hung from chains. This was Forward Operating Base Kestrel, medical station for a conflict that had no name, only coordinates. The building had been a grain storage facility once. You could still see the old conveyor mounts bolted to the walls. Now it housed 40 beds, 2 operating rooms, and a pharmacy the size of a closet. The staff called it the warehouse. Patients called it the last stop, because if you made it here, you were either going home or going into the ground. Wind rattled the windows. The thermometer outside read -18 Celsius. Inside, it was barely above freezing despite the heaters running constantly. The medical staff wore thermals under their scrubs. Patients got extra blankets, heated with hot water bottles when available. Everything smelled like disinfectant and kerosene. Rachel Brennan worked the night shift. 34 years old, medium height, brown hair pulled tight. She moved through the ward, checking IVs, adjusting blankets, her steps measured and silent. The other nurses knew her as reliable, competent, distant. She never joined them for meals, never told stories from before. When asked where she served previously, she said, Afghanistan, and changed the subject. Her hands were steady. Always. Even when others shook from cold or exhaustion. Even during the worst trauma cases, when blood slicked the floor and screaming filled the room, Rachel's hands stayed level. Her voice stayed calm. Ortiz once said she had ice in her veins. Rachel didn't correct her. The truth was simpler. Rachel had learned to compartmentalize, separate emotion from action, feel later, maybe never. It was a survival skill, honed over years. First in sniper school, where hesitation meant failure. Then in the field, where hesitation meant death. She'd carried it into nursing, where it manifested as professional distance. Colleagues mistook it for coldness. Patients found it reassuring. She didn't care either way. Tonight she sutured a shrapnel wound on a 19-year-old corporal. His hands shook. "Will I go back?" he asked. Rachel threaded the needle without looking up. "Depends on the x-rays." "Hold still." Her voice was flat, clinical. The boy winced as she pulled the thread through. "You don't talk much." Rachel cut the suture. "Talking doesn't close wounds." She finished the dressing and walked to the supply closet. Inside, between boxes of gauze and saline bags, she paused. Her left hand flexed twice, then stilled. An old reflex. She used to check trigger tension this way. 400 meters, 600, 800 in good conditions. All gone now. She had promised herself. No more crosshairs. No more watching breath clouds dissipate before the shot. She was a nurse. She saved people. Outside, the blizzard intensified. Visibility dropped to 15 meters. Radio chatter from the guard post reported normal conditions, but the static grew worse by the hour. Rachel returned to the ward. 26 patients, 3 critical, 2 surgeons asleep in the back room, 4 other nurses scattered across shifts. At 0300 hours, she was the only medical staff awake. She noticed things others missed. The way Corporal Hayes favored his right leg even after the left was treated. The pattern of helicopter arrivals always pairs, never singles. The guard rotations that changed every 4 hours, except on Thursdays. Details. Her old instructors called it situational awareness. Rachel called it survival. She checked the morphine logs, counted bandages, restocked the crash cart. Routine work, the kind that required no thought. Better that way. Thinking led to remembering. Remembering led to Kandahar, the village. The choice she made. The reason she left. Snow piled against the windows. The building creaked. Rachel pulled her cardigan tighter and continued her rounds. Morning shift arrived at 0630. Lieutenant Sarah Ortiz, head nurse, 42, ex-Army Reserve. She poured instant coffee and reviewed the night log. Quiet? Rachel nodded. Corporal Hayes needs his dressing changed at 10. Private Miller spiked a fever at 5. Gave him acetaminophen. It broke. Ortiz scanned the chart. You always write the cleanest notes. Rachel stored her stethoscope. Accuracy matters. She clocked out and walked to the staff quarters, a prefab trailer with 6 bunks. The other nurses were already talking, comparing shifts, complaining about the cold. Rachel lay on her bunk fully clothed, boots still laced. She stared at the ceiling until her mind went blank, then slept for exactly 4 hours. No alarm. Her body knew. During the day, Rachel was a shadow. She ate alone, read trauma manuals. When Nurse Thompson invited her to a card game, she declined. "I need to review the new antibiotic protocols." Thompson laughed. "You already know them better than the doctors." Rachel didn't respond. Socializing created bonds. Bonds created questions. Questions led to the past. But people noticed things anyway. The way Rachel always chose the bunk nearest the exit. How she scanned rooflines when stepping outside. How she never sat with her back to a door. Dr. Marcus Webb, the senior surgeon, once commented, "You move like military." Rachel loaded a syringe. "I am military. We all are." Webb shook his head. "No, I mean combat military. Infantry. Something." Rachel's file said she served 3 tours as a medic. Honorable discharge. Standard credentials. Nothing unusual. What the file didn't say, Rachel spent 18 months with a Marine Scout sniper team, call sign Falcon. Confirmed kills, 47. Her spotter, Sergeant Danny Cross, used to joke she could thread a needle at 400 meters. She never joked back. Jokes meant you weren't taking it seriously. And if you didn't take it seriously, you died. That afternoon, the blizzard worsened. The meteorologist on the radio said it would last 3 days. Supply helicopters were grounded. The hospital had enough food, medicine, and fuel for a week, maybe 2 if they rationed. No one seemed worried. Forward bases ran on contingency. This was just weather. Rachel returned to duty at 1,800 hours. The sun had already set. The ward was dimmer. Now they conserved generator power after dark. She moved between patients, adjusting IVs, checking vitals. Corporal Hayes asked, "Do you have family?" Rachel recorded his temperature. No. Hayes waited for more. Rachel said nothing. Hayes tried again. "You ever get lonely?" Rachel met his eyes briefly. Loneliness is safer than attachment. She moved to the next bed. At 2,100 hours, she passed Dr. Webb in the hallway. He was reviewing x-rays on a light board. "Brennan, can you check this?" "Third rib, left side. Fracture or shadow?" Rachel studied the image. "Fracture. Hairline. He'll need binding and rest for 6 weeks." Webb grunted approval. "You've got a good eye." Rachel handed back the film. "Training." At 2,230 hours, the radio crackled. The voice was Sergeant Briggs from the guard post. "Kestrel, Maine, we've got comms interference. Heavy static. Can't reach Outpost River." Lieutenant Ortiz took the handset. "Could be the storm." "Keep trying," Briggs acknowledged. Rachel listened from across the room. Comms interference. Blizzards caused interference, yes, but not selectively, not just to one outpost. She'd seen this pattern before. In Helmand Province, 3 years ago, insurgents would jam communications before an attack, create confusion, isolate the target. Military doctrine was predictable because it worked. And if these insurgents had access to signal jammers, they weren't poorly equipped militia. They were organized, trained, dangerous. Rachel's mind shifted into threat assessment mode automatically. She cataloged the hospital's vulnerabilities. Single entry point at the front, reinforced but exposed. Rear exit, steel door, good. Windows 23 total, all ground level. Roof access via maintenance ladder. Guard post 2 personnel, light arms. No reinforcements within 30 kilometers. In a firefight, they'd be overwhelmed in minutes. She walked to the window and looked out. Snow swirled in the darkness. The guard tower's spotlight swept the perimeter every 40 seconds. Standard, but Rachel noticed the pattern was off. 38 seconds, then 42, then 36. Someone in the tower was distracted or nervous. At 2,300, a private stumbled in from the cold, face red, breathing hard. "Lieutenant, Briggs wants you at the guard post. Says the motion sensors keep tripping." Ortiz frowned. "Animals?" The private shrugged. "Maybe. But he's acting weird, real twitchy." Ortiz grabbed her jacket and headed out. Rachel continued her rounds, but her attention was split. Motion sensors. In a blizzard, animals wouldn't move in this cold. They'd burrow down. Wait it out. She paused at a supply cabinet and opened it. Inside, behind the IV bags, she had stashed a tactical flashlight and a field knife. Old habits. She checked the flashlight batteries good. The knife's edge was still sharp. She closed the cabinet and returned to her station. Not yet. Maybe never. But ready. Ortiz returned 20 minutes later, snow dusting her shoulders. Briggs thinks it's equipment malfunction. Sensors are old, cold, probably screwed with the wiring. She didn't sound convinced. Rachel asked, "Did you see anything?" Ortiz shook her head. "Just snow. Can't see 10 feet. Rachel nodded slowly. "Good cover." Ortiz blinked. "What?" Rachel turned away. "Nothing. Just talking." At midnight, Rachel stood near the rear exit, ostensibly checking the emergency generator. The door was steel, secured with a crossbar. She tested it. Solid. Then she looked up. The ceiling was corrugated metal, supported by wooden beams. In the far corner, a maintenance ladder led to a roof hatch. She memorized the distance. 12 meters from the door. 8 rungs on the ladder. Hatch secured, with a sliding bolt. She went outside briefly, ostensibly to check fuel levels. The cold bit through her scrubs instantly. She scanned the perimeter. The guard tower was 60 meters east. The tree line started 100 meters north. Hills rose beyond. Good vantage points. If someone wanted to observe the hospital, they'd use those hills. If someone wanted to attack, they'd come from the trees. Back inside, Rachel found Dr. Webb in the break room. "Doctor, if we lost power, how long could we run on the backup generator?" Webb poured stale coffee. 4 hours, maybe. Why? Rachel leaned against the wall, just wondering about contingencies. Webb studied her. "You're always thinking worst case, aren't you?" Rachel's expression didn't change. Someone should. The attack came at 0147 hours. No warning. Just glass exploding inward, and the lights dying. Gunfire punched through the darkness short, controlled bursts. Professional. Rachel hit the floor instantly. Around her, patients screamed. Ortiz shouted orders, but her voice was drowned by another volley. The muzzle flashes painted the ward in strobing white. Rachel crawled toward the nearest patient, Private Miller, the one with the fever. He was trying to sit up, disoriented. She pushed him down. "Stay flat. Don't move." Her voice was calm, clipped, combat voice. She hadn't used it in 3 years. It came back like muscle memory. More glass shattered. The front entrance buckled. Voices outside, barking commands in a language Rachel recognized but didn't speak. Insurgents. At least 6, maybe 8. They moved in pairs, one covering, one advancing. Standard assault tactics. Not amateurs. Rachel pulled Miller off his bed and onto the floor between 2 other bunks. Better cover. She moved to the next patient, a sergeant with a leg wound. He was already down, hands over his head. Smart. She swept the room. 14 patients in this ward. Ortiz and 2 other nurses were herding them toward the back. Good. Rachel turned the other way. The rear exit. She moved in a low crouch, using the beds as cover. Another burst of gunfire stitched the far wall. Someone screamed, "Not a patient." Nurse Thompson. Rachel didn't look back. Couldn't. The rear door was 30 feet away. 20. 10. She reached it and threw the crossbar. The door swung open into the blizzard. Wind slammed her, driving snow into her face. She pulled the door shut behind her. Outside, the cold was immediate and absolute. Rachel's breath fogged. Her scrubs offered 0 insulation. She ignored it. She ran along the building's exterior, staying low, heading for the maintenance ladder. Her boots crunched through snow. She reached the ladder and climbed. 8 rungs. Her hands were already numb. The roof hatch was frozen. She slammed it with her elbow. It gave. She pushed through. The roof was a sheet of ice. Rachel crawled toward the northern edge. Below, she saw muzzle flashes near the front entrance. The insurgents were inside now. She counted voices. 7. No, 8. And they were spreading out, searching. If they found the patients clustered in the back, it would be a massacre. Rachel pressed her face against the metal roof. Her heart rate was 60 beats per minute, steady. She focused on the tree line. There, movement. A 9th person, watching from the edge of the forest. The Overwatch. Every assault team had one. Someone with a radio and a rifle, coordinating the attack. Take him out, and the team inside would lose direction. But she had no rifle, no scope, nothing. She was a nurse. She saved people. That's what she told herself when she left. No more killing. No more watching someone drop through glass. No more ghosts. Gunfire echoed inside the hospital. A scream cut short. Rachel closed her eyes, breathed, opened them. She couldn't save anyone from up here, but maybe she didn't need a rifle. Rachel's hands remembered before her mind did. The way her left palm cupped an imaginary stock, the way her right index finger curved around nothing, triggered discipline. She had promised herself. After Kandahar, after the village, no more. Kandahar, 18 months ago. Her spotter, Danny Cross, lay beside her on a rooftop overlooking a market square. Intel said a high-value target would pass through at noon. They waited. Rachel watched through her scope, tracking faces. At 1143, Danny whispered, "Movement. Northeast corner. Blue sedan." Rachel adjusted, found the car. The target stepped out, 52-year-old male, beard, clean clothes. He walked toward a fruit stand. Rachel's crosshairs settled on his chest. Then a child ran into frame. A girl, maybe 7. She grabbed the man's hand. He smiled, picked her up. Rachel's finger was on the trigger. Danny said, "Wind's good. Take the shot." Rachel didn't move. The man kissed the girl's forehead, set her down, started walking again, away from the fruit stand, away from the crowd. "Brennan," Danny hissed. "Now." Rachel exhaled. The man stopped to tie his shoe. Alone now. Clear backdrop. She squeezed. The rifle kicked. The man collapsed. Clean. One shot. Confirmed kill. The girl screamed. Rachel heard it even from 300 meters away. High-pitched, broken. The girl ran to the body, shook his shoulder, kept screaming. Market vendors rushed over. Someone called for help. Someone else called for police. And Rachel lay on the rooftop, eyes still pressed to the scope, watching a 7-year-old realize her father was dead. Danny clapped her shoulder. "Good shot. Let's move." They packed their gear and exfiltrated. Mission accomplished. Rachel said nothing during the debriefing. Said nothing during the celebration that night when command praised the operation. She sat in her bunk and stared at the wall. The girl's scream echoed in her mind. It would echo for months, years, forever. 3 days later, Intel walked it back. Wrong target. The man was a shopkeeper, no ties to insurgents. A mistake. They apologized. Rachel said nothing. That night, she dismantled her rifle, packed her gear, and submitted discharge papers. Danny tried to talk her out of it. "It wasn't your fault. Bad intel happens." Rachel looked at him. "I pulled the trigger." She left the Marines, got her nursing license, deployed to a field hospital. Saving people was supposed to balance the scales, sutures instead of bullets. But at night, she still saw the shopkeeper, the way he crumpled, the way the girl ran to him, screaming. On the roof now, Rachel opened her eyes. Inside the hospital, another scream. She thought about the oath she took as a nurse. Do no harm. But harm was already happening, and she was the only one who could stop it. Not with a rifle. She didn't have one. But with something else. She studied the Overwatch position again. The man stood near a large pine, partially concealed. He held a radio. Every 20 seconds, he lifted it to his mouth, coordinating the assault. Rachel gauged the distance. 140 meters. Uphill, in a blizzard. Impossible for most shooters. For her, it would have been routine. But she had no rifle, so she needed a different plan. She scanned the roof. Near the generator exhaust was a toolbox, left by maintenance crews. She crawled to it. Inside, wrenches, screwdrivers, electrical tape, and a flare gun. Standard emergency equipment. She checked it. Loaded. One flare. Rachel returned to the edge. The Overwatch was still there. She calculated. Flare guns had terrible accuracy beyond 50 meters. The projectile was slow. The trajectory arced. But the Overwatch wasn't moving. And his attention was on the hospital, not the roof. If she could get the flare close enough to illuminate him, the snow would reflect the light. He'd be exposed, blind, disoriented. It wasn't a kill shot, but it might be enough. She aimed high, compensating for the arc. Breathed out. Fired. The flare rocketed into the night, trailing red smoke. It detonated above the tree line, turning the forest into daylight. The Overwatch jerked, raising a hand to shield his eyes. In that moment, Rachel saw his face clearly. Young, scared. He fumbled with the radio, shouting. Inside the hospital, the gunfire paused. Confusion. Rachel had bought them seconds, maybe a minute. It wasn't enough. She needed more. The flare burned out. Darkness returned, but the Overwatch was spooked. He stepped back into deeper cover. Rachel heard him shouting commands through the radio retreat. Regroup. Something was wrong. But the insurgents inside didn't respond immediately. They were committed. Halfway through a raid, momentum kept them moving. Rachel climbed down the ladder. Her hands were ice. She could barely grip the rungs. At the bottom, she circled the building, staying in the shadows. The front entrance was blown open, the door hanging from one hinge. Inside, she heard footsteps, shouted orders. She moved to a broken window and peered in. The ward was chaos. Beds overturned, medical equipment smashed. 3 insurgents were visible, rifles raised, sweeping flashlights across the room. They were looking for something. Weapons? Intelligence? Or just causing terror? Rachel couldn't tell. She saw Ortiz crouched behind a supply cart, shielding 2 patients. Doctor Webb was on the floor, hands on his head. The other nurses were out of sight. One insurgent kicked open the door to the medication storage. Found nothing useful. He barked something and moved on. Another approached the patients. Ortiz stood, hands raised. Don't. They're wounded. No threat. The insurgent shoved her aside. She fell hard. Rachel's jaw tightened. She moved to the rear entrance, slipped inside. The back hallway was dark, empty. She could hear the insurgents 2 rooms away. She needed to create confusion, make them think they were outnumbered. She found the breaker panel and killed the generator. Total darkness, shouts of alarm, flashlight beams danced erratically. Rachel moved silently through the blackness. She knew this building better than they did. Every corner, every obstruction. She reached the supply closet where she'd hidden her knife, retrieved it. The blade was 8 inches, serrated on one side. Not a weapon, a tool. But tools could be improvised. Her body moved on autopilot. Years of training had created muscle memory that transcended conscious thought. She navigated by sound and spatial awareness, counted steps, tracked distances. Her breathing was controlled, silent. The insurgents were loud by comparison, shouting, boots stomping, flashlights sweeping wildly. They were scared. Good. Fear created mistakes. She crept toward the nearest insurgent. He was young, maybe 20, scanning the darkness with his flashlight. His rifle hung loose on its sling. He was using both hands for the light. Mistake. Rachel waited until he turned away, then closed the distance in 3 steps. She didn't use the knife. Instead, she kicked the back of his knee. He dropped. She grabbed his rifle before he hit the ground, twisted it free, and slammed the stock into his temple. He went limp. Rachel checked the rifle. AK pattern, 30-round magazine, full, safety off. She slung it over her shoulder and moved on. Another insurgent was ahead, calling out to his partner. No response. He sounded nervous. Rachel didn't engage. She circled behind him, found a fire extinguisher, and set it off. White foam exploded into the hallway. The insurgent fired blindly. Rachel was already gone. Outside, the Overwatch was shouting into the radio. Report. What's happening? Static. The team inside was fracturing. Rachel moved back outside through the rear exit. She climbed onto a storage shed adjacent to the building. From here, she had a clear view of the tree line. The Overwatch was still there, but he was agitated, pacing. He knew something was wrong. Rachel raised the rifle, checked the sights. Iron sights, no optics. Distance, 130 meters. Now he'd moved closer. Wind, gusting from the northwest at 15 knots. Temperature, -12 Celsius. Snowfall, dense. All factors she'd calculated 1,000 times before. Her finger found the trigger. She exhaled, held. The recoil was familiar, almost comforting. The Overwatch dropped. The radio on his body crackled. The remaining insurgents inside were calling for orders. Silence. Panic set in. Rachel heard them shouting, arguing, then running. They fled through the front entrance into the blizzard, scattering. She didn't pursue. She descended from the shed and re-entered the hospital. The ward was silent, except for labored breathing. Rachel moved through the darkness toward the sounds. She found Ortiz first, conscious but dazed. "You okay?" Ortiz blinked up at her. "Brennan? What? Where did you go?" Rachel didn't answer. She helped Ortiz to her feet and guided her toward the patients. "Check them. Make sure they're stable." She restored power to the generator. The lights flickered on, revealing the damage. Broken glass everywhere, bullet holes in the walls. Blood on the floor, Nurse Thompson's. Rachel found her near the supply cart, clutching her shoulder. The wound was clean, through and through. Rachel applied pressure. "You'll live. Stay still." Thompson's face was pale. They just came in shooting." Rachel worked quickly. "I know." Dr. Webb appeared, limping. "Is it over?" Rachel nodded. "For now." Webb surveyed the room. "How many did we lose?" Rachel's voice was flat. "None. Thompson's injured. Everyone else is shaken but intact." Webb stared at her. "How?" Rachel finished bandaging Thompson's shoulder. They got disorganized, retreated. Outside, dawn was breaking. The blizzard had weakened. Rachel went to the front entrance and looked out. Footprints led into the trees, the insurgents' escape route. She counted. 7 sets. 1 short. The Overwatch. She walked out into the snow, following the tracks toward the tree line. She found him where she dropped him, face down, arms spread. The snow around him was red. She checked for a pulse. Nothing. Rachel stood over the body. Felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction. Just cold. She turned and walked back toward the hospital. Halfway there, she stopped. A thought crystallized. She had promised herself no more killing, and now she'd broken that promise. Did it matter that she'd saved lives? Did the math work that way? 1 death to prevent 20? She didn't know. And standing in the snow, exhausted, freezing, she realized she didn't care. The promise had been naive. A clean break from the past was impossible. The past lived in her hands, her reflexes, her instincts. She could deny it, hide it, but it was always there, waiting. The snow crunched under her boots as she walked. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not from physical exhaustion, she'd operated on less sleep, in worse conditions. This was something else. The weight of recognition. She'd spent 18 months telling herself she was different now, reformed, redeemed through service. But one crisis had stripped away that illusion. She wasn't a nurse who used to be a sniper. She was a sniper who happened to work as a nurse. The distinction mattered. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe labels were irrelevant. She'd saved 26 lives tonight. That was the only metric that counted. The Overwatch would have coordinated a massacre. Without her intervention, the ward would be full of bodies. So what if she'd used skills from her old life? So what if she'd killed? Context mattered. Intent mattered. She told herself this, but the justification felt hollow. The shopkeeper's daughter wouldn't care about context. The Overwatch's family wouldn't care about intent. Back inside, Ortiz was organizing triage. The patients were being sorted by injury severity. Thompson was on a gurney, her shoulder properly dressed now. "Doctor." Webb was on the radio, calling for evacuation helicopters. Rachel joined Ortiz. "What do you need?" Ortiz handed her a clipboard. "Check these vitals. Make sure no one's going into shock." Rachel took the board and got to work. Hours passed. The storm cleared. By midday, helicopters arrived. Military police secured the perimeter. Investigators documented the scene. Rachel gave a brief statement. She'd hidden during the attack, emerged after the insurgents fled. Nothing more. The MPs didn't press. They had physical evidence. Bodies in the trees, spent casings, blood trails. The story was obvious enough. One investigator asked, "Did you see the insurgents?" Rachel shook her head. "Just heard gunfire. I hid in the supply closet." The investigator wrote this down. "Lucky you weren't caught." Rachel's expression didn't change. "Yes. Lucky." By evening, most patients had been evacuated. The critically wounded went first, then the walking injured. The field hospital was declared unsafe pending repairs. Staff would be reassigned. Rachel packed her belongings, 2 duffel bags, everything she owned. She worked mechanically, folding clothes, organizing supplies. Around her, the other nurses did the same, talking nervously about the attack, speculating on what happened. Ortiz approached. "Brennan, you did good work last night." Rachel zipped her bag. "Just doing my job." Ortiz leaned against the doorframe. "It's more than that. You kept your head." A lot of people froze. Rachel didn't respond. Ortiz continued. "Where will you go?" Rachel shouldered her bag. "Wherever they send me." Ortiz nodded slowly. "You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I can usually read people. But you? I don't know what you're thinking. Ever." Rachel met her eyes. "Maybe that's for the best." Ortiz frowned. "Maybe." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Ortiz extended her hand. "Take care of yourself." Rachel shook it. "You too." Dr. Webb found her at the helicopter pad, waiting for transport. "Brennan, got a minute?" Rachel set down her bags. "What is it?" Webb glanced around, making sure they were alone. "That rifle. The one near the rear entrance. Where did it come from?" Rachel's face remained neutral. "An insurgent must have dropped it." Webb nodded slowly. "Right. And the overwatch in the trees. Single shot, center mass, clean kill. That's not luck." Rachel said nothing. Webb pulled out a cigarette, didn't light it. "I'm not going to ask questions, but I want you to know, whatever you did out there, you saved lives. Thompson's, Ortiz's, all of them." Rachel picked up her bags. "I'm a nurse. That's the job." Webb finally lit the cigarette. "Yeah, a nurse." He smiled faintly. "Take care, Brennan." Rachel nodded and walked toward the helicopter. The rotors spun up. Rachel climbed aboard and strapped in. The helicopter lifted off, banking over the damaged hospital. She looked down. The blood in the snow was already fading, covered by fresh powder. By tomorrow, there'd be no trace. As if nothing happened. As if she'd never been there. She thought about the Overwatch. His face, young and frightened. She wondered if he had family. A sister, maybe. Or a daughter. Someone who would never know what happened to him. Just like the shopkeeper in Kandahar. Just like all the others. Ghosts. The helicopter flew south, toward the base. Rachel closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, just listened to the engine's rhythm. Steady, reliable, drowning out everything else. Rachel's new assignment came 3 days later. Another field hospital, different location. She didn't ask where. Geography didn't matter. The work was the same. She reported at 0600 hours, received her orientation, and started the night shift. Familiar routine. Sutures, IVs, medication rounds. The other nurses introduced themselves. She nodded politely and said little. Word of the attack had spread. Rachel became known as the survivor from Kestrel. People asked what happened. She gave the same answer each time. She hid. The insurgents fled. Nothing heroic, just luck. Most people accepted this, but a few looked at her strangely, as if sensing something unspoken. She ignored them. 1 week after the attack, Dr. Webb called her. His voice on the phone was careful. "Brennan, how are you settling in?" Rachel was in the break room, alone. "Fine." "The work's straightforward." Webb paused. "Listen, I wanted to tell you." The investigation concluded. "They're calling it a terrorist raid, random target. Bad luck." Rachel poured coffee. "Makes sense." Another pause. "They found something interesting though. Ballistics on the Overwatch. Single shot, AK pattern rifle. Extremely precise. They're calling it a lucky ricochet." Rachel stirred her coffee. "A ricochet? That's convenient." Webb's voice dropped. "I didn't say anything. About the rifle, or about you." Rachel set down the spoon. "Thank you." Webb sighed. "Don't thank me, just. Whatever you did, don't do it again. Hang up your old life. Be a nurse. That's all." Rachel looked out the window. Snow was falling again. "I'm trying." Webb's voice softened. "I know. Take care." The line went dead. That night, Rachel worked her shift as usual. A soldier came in with a broken arm. She set it, applied a cast. He asked, "You work at Kestrel?" Rachel finished wrapping the cast. "I did." The soldier nodded. "Heard it was bad. Glad you made it out." Rachel's hands moved mechanically. "So am I." At 0300 hours, the ward was quiet. Rachel stood at the window, watching snow fall. She thought about the promise she'd made. No more killing. She'd broken it. And if another situation arose, would she break it again? The answer, she realized, was yes. Because the promise had been about her, not the people she could save. And in the end, their lives mattered more than her peace of mind. This realization didn't bring relief. If anything, it made things harder. Before, she'd had a clear identity. Former sniper, current nurse, trying to atone. Now that identity was fractured. She couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't compartmentalize. The two roles had merged, and she'd have to live with that fusion. There would be no clean redemption, no moment where the scales balanced and she could walk away guilt-free. She'd carry both the lives she saved and the lives she took. Both would haunt her equally, but maybe that was how it should be. Maybe living with that weight was the real penance, not running from it, not pretending it didn't exist, just carrying it. Day after day, shift after shift, saving who she could, accepting that some nights would require skills she wished she didn't have, being both healer and hunter, both savior and killer. The contradiction was unbearable. She'd learned to bear it anyway. She turned from the window and returned to her rounds. The work continued. It always would. Sutures, bandages, medications, small repairs in a broken world. And if the world broke further, if armed men came through the door again, she would do what needed doing. Not because she wanted to, because no one else could. 3 months later, the field hospital relocated. Rachel transferred with it. New location, same mission. She worked nights, kept to herself. The other staff learned not to ask personal questions. She was competent, reliable, distant. Exactly what the job required. One evening, a new surgeon arrived. Captain David Reeves, 45, former Special Forces medic. He reviewed the staff files and noticed Rachel's. "You served with a Marine Scout sniper team?" Rachel looked up from her paperwork. "It's in my file." Reeves smiled. "Must have been interesting work." Rachel's expression didn't change. "It was a long time ago." Reeves nodded. "Fair enough. Just curious. We don't get many former snipers working as nurses." Rachel returned to her paperwork. "I'm not a sniper. I'm a nurse." Reeves didn't press, but over the following weeks, he watched her, the way she moved, the way she assessed situations. One night, during a mass casualty event, 15 wounded from an IED strike, Rachel coordinated triage with military efficiency. She directed staff, prioritized patients, made rapid decisions. When it was over, Reeves approached her. "You've done this before. Not just medical triage, combat triage." Rachel washed her hands. "I've had training." Reeves leaned against the sink. "Training doesn't give you that kind of calm. Experience does." Rachel dried her hands. "What's your point?" Reeves studied her. "No point. Just an observation. You're good at this, really good. But you're also something else, something you're trying not to be." Rachel met his eyes. "We're all something else. That's why we're here. Doing penance." Reeves nodded slowly. "Maybe. But penance doesn't erase the past. It just buries it. And buried things have a way of resurfacing." Rachel walked past him toward the exit. "Then let's hope they stay buried." She left the hospital and stood in the cold. The base was quiet. Distant mountains loomed under a moonless sky. She thought about Kandahar, about the shopkeeper, about the overwatch at Kestrel. All the ghosts? She had tried to escape, change careers, change identities, be someone else. But Reeves was right. The past didn't disappear. It lived in her muscles, her instincts, in the way she scanned rooftops, in the way her hands remembered the weight of a rifle. She was a nurse, but she was also a sniper. Both truths coexisted, incompatible, yet inseparable. People talked about reconciling with their past, making peace with it. Rachel didn't think that was possible. Some pasts couldn't be reconciled, only acknowledged, accepted, integrated. She'd killed people, saved people. Both actions defined her. Both would continue to define her. The question wasn't whether she could erase one or the other. The question was whether she could live as both. The answer, she decided, was yes. Not because she wanted to, not because it felt right, but because the alternative, refusing to use her skills when lives were at stake, was worse. She thought about the patients at Kestrel. If she'd stayed hidden in the supply closet, how many would have died? Thompson? Ortiz? All 26? The math was brutal but simple. One death to prevent many, the calculus of violence. She'd learned it as a sniper, applied it as a nurse. A transport helicopter passed overhead, rotors thumping. Rachel watched it disappear into the darkness. Somewhere out there, another conflict raged. Another hospital needed staff. Another night shift waited. And if danger came again, if armed men broke through the doors, she would respond. Not because she was a hero, because she was a ghost. Silent, efficient, unseen. The night nurse who saved lives. The sniper who never left. The cold bit deeper. She should go inside. But she stood there a moment longer, looking at the mountains. Somewhere in those peaks, other battles were being fought. Other people were dying. And tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, some of them would arrive here, bleeding, broken, needing help, and she would help them, with sutures and bandages and medications, with steady hands and calm voice, and if necessary,